What we get to talk about today is the Kingdom of Mali. And Mali is a word that means where the king dwells. Let's start out by looking at our timeline. So at this point in time, Ghana had fallen apart. And one of the main reasons Ghana fell apart was because a severe drought dramatically weakened its ability to produce crops. And also, traders were tired of giving Ghana money when they passed through the kingdom, so they figured out alternate trade routes. So the Kingdom of Mali came about in the early 13th century and lasted for a few hundred years. We need to start out by looking at how it got started. So the first king of Mali was Sundiata, and most of what we know about Sundiata came through oral traditions. For thousands of years, the only history coming out of West Africa was coming through these oral stories passed down from one family member to the next. So Sundiata spent his early adult years building up an army, and once he decided that it was big enough, he came in and he overthrew the current king, starting the Kingdom of Mali in the early 13th century. So let's jump right in and look at everyday life in the Kingdom of Mali. So 100% of all of Ghana's travel and trade was done either on foot or with animal. Mali was the first kingdom to utilize the river systems and use boats to transport goods up and down the rivers. This made it much easier to transport large quantities of goods to and from different locations. Most people living in the kingdom had access to fresh water, and that is why many of the people grew things like rice, millet, papaya, gourds, cotton, peanuts, and they were able to raise animals nearby for slaughter and for food. Many of those animals were things like goats, cattle, sheep, chicken, and many farmers living in this area actually used slave labor to get most of its work done. So what we need to talk about now is how the Kingdom of Mali itself as a government made its money. So the Kingdom of Mali was located in the heart of West Africa. And to the north of the kingdom were the great salt mines of the Tegesa and the Sahara Desert. And to the south were the incredibly productive gold mines. And all of the traders had to go through the Kingdom of Mali to get at the gold and to get at the salt. And so all of the pathways coming out of the gold mines went into Mali, and all of the pathways coming out of the salt mines went into Mali. And every single trader that went through the kingdom had to pay a tax to pass through. And as you can imagine, this would make them very, very, very rich. One additional way that the Kingdom of Mali made more money was they actually went out and they discovered more gold mines. So the Kingdom of Ghana had access to gold mines, but when Mali came around, they had the same gold mines as Ghana, but they were able to discover more. And this made them far more wealthy than the Empire of Ghana. So now that you understand the types of foods that the empire produced and how the government was making money, I think it's time for us to take a look at some of its leaders. When it comes to Mali, there was no leader more talked about than Mansa Musa. So Mansa Musa came to power in the early 14th century, and as its ruler, one of the things that he did was expand the size of the empire. He ruled for about 25 years, and he worked really, really hard to make sure that the people living in his empire lived under peace and stability. At this point in time, almost every single person, including Mansa Musa living in the empire, practiced the religion of Islam. And like any good Muslim, Mansa Musa believed in the 5 pillars of faith. However, he did a few things differently. So all of the laws going on in this time were based on the Holy Quran, but some of the laws he chose not to follow. For example, he did not require the women living in Mali to wear the traditional hijab or headscarf. And throughout the empire, you could still find many West Africans practicing some of the traditional rituals, like praying to their ancestors that had died before them for protection and oversight and healing. So one of the things that's incredibly interesting is Mansa Musa, right in the middle or the height of its rule in Mali, decided to take his Hajj. As you know, one of the 5 pillars of faith is to travel to Mecca once in your lifetime. So he decided to do this right in the middle of being the ruler of this great empire. So he gathered up hundreds of people, hundreds of camels, and he set off into the Sahara Desert. And one of the things that he did was he made all of the slaves traveling with him carry 5 pounds of gold. And so along his trip, he was able to give out gold to the different cities and the different kingdoms and empires he would stop at along the way. So this is kind of the earliest forms of diplomacy where he's going around giving these gifts to different governments, hopefully wanting to win favor or make them like Mali a lot more. So after Mansa Musa's trip, a lot more people, and especially Muslim communities, were really interested in what was going on in Mali. And what you saw was a lot more people traveling to Mali, and it happened to be that most of them traveled to the city of Timbuktu. So it didn't take long for the city of Timbuktu to become this center for education, or especially Islamic education. So if you were a Muslim growing up in Arabia, North Africa, or even southern Spain, you would travel to the city of Timbuktu if you wanted to get that world-class education, because the best scientists were there, the best mathematicians were there. It was definitely the place for learning in this area of the world, basically the Harvard or Oxford of West Africa. So that's a short summary of the Empire of Mali, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the lasting effects of this area of the world. So today, still millions of people speak the same language that the Mali people spoke, and also because of slavery and the fact that most of the world's slaves at this time were coming out of West Africa, you can find West African cultural traditions throughout most of the world. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you'd like to find photos like the ones I used in my presentation, please go to photopin.com, and I look forward to you joining me in a future presentation.